අපි එනකන් ඉන්න ඕනේ නෑ. සර් වීඩියෝ කෝල් එකකින් කනෙක්ට් කරමු.
හරි.
ඉන්ෂුරන්ස් එකෙන් එනකන් ඉන්නේ නැද්ද?
මොකටද? ක්ලේම් එක අප්‍රූව්ඩ්. යන ගමන් කෑෂ් ගමු.
පිස්සුනේ.
නෑ ඒ ෆෙයාර්ෆස්ට් එකේ හැටි.
රස්ති අදුවක් නැති මෝටර් ඉන්ෂුරන්ස්. වැඩි ෆෙයා ක්ලේම් එක ෆාස්ට්. හොඳම ඉන්ෂුරන්ස් එකට අදම මාරු වෙන්න.
Welcome to the launch of AmCham Sri Lanka's brand new series of webinars as part of our Bounce Back Sri Lanka initiative, which of course is brought to you in partnership with Fairfirst Insurance and the Daily FT. As you know, our webinars are themed, created and curated especially for you to bring you information, insights and analysis and in-depth knowledge on topics that are really relevant, important and immediately impactful to you. And I'm sure you've been following our previous series, the AmCham Sri Lanka Knowledge Hub series. And of course, that the topics we focused on helped you in your planning toward business continuity and repurposing during the time of lockdown. Now, as we move forward into our second month of return to normalcy and accelerate our efforts at kickstarting our businesses and our economy, we do so not in the aftermath of a pandemic, but rather in the midst of it. And we always need to keep that in mind. This means that businesses need to bounce back effectively and sustainably in order to find their new niche in a new world order, as it were. And if they are to survive and thrive through the challenges and restrictions that C-19 will bring to the business environment and economics across the globe. So here at AmCham, we've created a series of activities and resources that builds on a theme of bouncing back, providing insights and advice resources on ideas to restart and sustain your businesses. And this series of webinars is but one of the resources that we have planned for you in this series, which includes publications, info nuggets, and thought leadership from top business leaders and influencers. So don't miss out on the opportunity to join the conversation that drives Sri Lanka out of survival mode and into thrival mode. And yes, I did just coin that word. It doesn't exist or didn't exist before now. So 70 plus days of super paced learning, adapting and innovating on the go. We are literally rebooted with a software upgrade. But what better way to catalyze that knowledge than to set the foundation of our recovery by way of, yes, a SWOT, a great SWOT as it were. And it is our intention that this SWOT or SWOTs by the experts in their field will provoke thought and ignite a few ideas for you in how you can capitalize on the identified opportunities. On our panel today, Dr. Ruwan Senathilaka, Director Medical at RCD Central Hospital. Dr. Senathilaka was Commissioned Officer of the Sri Lanka Army and was attached to the Sri Lanka Army Medical Corps, where during his tenure in the Army, in addition to other appointments he held, he commanded the military hospital in Anuradhapura and the 3rd Sri Lanka Army Medical Corps, serving the greater part of his career in operational areas. Dr. Senathilaka also served as the Chief Medical Officer of Sri Lanka's first ever peacekeeping mission in Haiti in 2004 and is a recipient of the prestigious UN Peacekeeper Medal. Dr. Senathilaka joined the private healthcare sector in 2008 and currently serves the RCD Central Hospital, Colombo, one of the RCD group of hospitals. And with his extensive experience in both the public and private health sector, as well as first-hand knowledge of the on-ground conditions, I and my team at AmCham feel that Dr. Senathilaka is the ideal expert to guide us through a medical SWOT for Sri Lanka. Independent consultant Ravi Ratnasabapathy is a finance man by training with 20 plus years of industry experience. He consults with the International Trade Center and the Asian Development Bank, and his keen interest in public policy and economics with a grasp of key issues in the Sri Lankan economy, coupled with a strong commercial and operational perspective, makes him indeed a much respected voice in economics and economic policy in Sri Lanka today. Needless to say, Ravi will guide us on an understanding of the economic vertical, explaining the status quo and identifying key opportunities, and of course, the threats. Saroshi Nandasiri, founder and chairperson of the Women's International Foundation, a social enterprise establishment that promotes women's economic, social, and personal empowerment in a holistic, integrated, and strategic way. She is also the Director Marketing and Business Development at the Colombo School of Business Management. She's an industry specialist counting over 15 years, and Saroshi today will be guiding us on a deep dive of the socio-psycho aspect of the C-19 environment. Your international relations and geopolitical expert this evening, Also our moderator, Mr. George Cook. George is the Deputy Director at the Bandaranaike Center for International Studies. A diplomat by profession, he has served the Bureau of the Foreign Minister and the East Asia and Pacific Division of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Sri Lanka. And in addition to a posting at the Embassy of Sri Lanka in Paris, he also served as the first secretary for the permanent delegation of Sri Lanka to the United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization, better known as UNESCO. George is a lecturer at the BCIS and the University of Colombo and is a visiting fellow for the Ubon Ratchathani University. Is that correct, George? Tongue twister it is. The Ubon Ratchathani University of Thailand. He's an alumnus of the Netherlands Institute of International Relations and a doctoral candidate at the University of Colombo. And I'm, again, as usual, your host and facilitator, Rai Raymond, General Manager ED of the American Chamber of Commerce in Sri Lanka, creator and facilitator of this series. George, over to you to guide us in this journey.
Thank you very much, Rai. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you for organizing this new series and for deciding to look at this particular topic and inviting the four of us. And we will be listening to all four in a short while. Charles Darwin made a very important observation, and you actually started talking about that as well, in terms of the fact of change. He very interestingly noted that it is not the strongest of the species that survives, nor the most intelligent. It is the one that is most responsive to change. And this is where, going into 2020, we've seen change taking over, change as though we've never seen it before. We've had to virtually leap into the future, and we've done it. And that is part of the art of managing, dealing with the new situation that we are either in, or we could say, and that is why I like to talk about mid or post COVID-19 that we're already facing. But how are we going to go about ensuring that we are going to be able to play a role, that we are going to be relevant? And at the end of the day, whatever field we may look at, whatever sector we may be focusing on, relevance remains one of the most critical factors. How do we ensure that what has to be done, what has been done, what is being done, and what is going to be done in the future is going to remain relevant for all of us, not only in Sri Lanka, but also for us around the world, in terms of how we are going to deal with this new change. So, first and foremost, you've asked me to look at the international relations aspect, to look at foreign policy, to look at what we're going to be doing 5 years from now, 1 year from now, 6 months from now. How do we go about bringing about some kind of change? And in order to carry out a SWOT analysis, I would just start off with the presentation now in terms of what we would be looking at. And this is where I like to discuss the fact that this is Sri Lanka's international relations SWOT mid or post COVID-19, and also foreign policy strategizing, how we're going to go about looking at it, how we're going to go about dealing with it. As you mentioned earlier on, Rai, we're also looking at understanding, comprehension, insight into how industries could benefit, how the government of Sri Lanka and industries themselves could capitalize on the opportunities that have been identified. And this is where we come to this very familiar term of globalization. And when we talk about globalization, obviously we understand globalization to be a concept that is quite phenomenal. It is massively beneficial. It has promoted interaction, integration. We've seen regionalism across the world. We've seen greater collaboration of industry, of commerce, of culture, of people, of languages, of diplomacy, you name it. Everything has come together. The benefits that we have derived from globalization are massive. And this is something absolutely wonderful to take note of. But the other side of the coin is that it can be terribly detrimental. Given the fact that we rely so heavily on each other, it seems to be a scenario in which when we look back and you go back 100 years, it was titled the Spanish flu at the time. Of course, it's debatable as to whether it originated in Spain or not. It was given the free media in Spain that actually led to a lot of publicity about the flu in there. But then that's for a different debate. But it took nearly a year for it to spread to some other parts of the world, in a second, in a third wave. as wave after wave engulfed different parts of the world. Now, at that time, things were very different out there. We were not flying as much as we are today. We were sailing, but it took time to sail. Commerce was apparent. Commerce was certainly a part and parcel of what we were doing, but things were very different back then. And this is where this detrimental aspect of it being terribly detrimental to us in the long run is something that we also need to take on board. And whilst acknowledging the fact that whether we like it or not, and something I like to always mention is the fact that Sri Lanka is an island, but we are not an island in that sense of the word. We are not isolated, cut off, dropped somewhere floating around in the Indian Ocean. Sri Lanka for centuries has been a country that has integrated very closely with the international community. And this is not something that happened post-independence. This is something that happened during the colonial period and also during the time of the kings. And we go back to the Roman Empire and interactions that we had with it, and so many other dynasties around the world, empires around the world, which Sri Lanka, known by various other names in the past, had a key interactive element. That aspect has got to be acknowledged. And that's what we're looking at today, I guess, in terms of understanding from an international relations perspective. How is all of this impacting Sri Lanka? Where are we going? How are we going forward? How are we going to respond to some of these changes? How are we going to be able to adapt? That adaptability is what becomes extremely crucial. So going on to the SWOT aspect of it, Rai, if we move on to our next slide, and we talk about our strengths, we talk about our weaknesses. I like to talk of them together. When we look at our strengths and weaknesses, we always talk about the fact that we enjoy supreme location, geographic location. But remember, it can be a massive blessing on one hand. It can also have a detrimental aspect on the other. And this is something that we've got to consider very, very carefully. Obviously, you attract more attention. When you attract more attention, you might be attracting other aspects which might be threatening, which might be causes for concern. And that is something that we can look at. We have various sides to it in terms of acceptance. And this is just some of the strengths that I like to jot down, whether it's in terms of acceptance internationally, being a part and parcel of the international community, interacting very closely with the international community, having historic connectivity with the world. We go thereafter into looking at natural features of the country, whether it is the deep sea ports, whether it is the international airports that we possess, whether it is the natural resources that we have in the country. And natural resources is not only in terms of objects within the country, but also in terms of people. We've got skilled labor, we've got unskilled labor, we've got a plethora of resources, as opposed to other countries which might be much smaller than us, much larger than us, that do not enjoy the same degree of resource base. We look at the seas around us. We're surrounded by them. The extent of sea that belongs to Sri Lanka, extending along the continental shelf. Now, these are aspects that are hitherto unexplored right now. But of course, in time to come, we're going to have to look at how we are going to be able to look at encapsulating the sea, the land, the air, the energy that we derive out of it, whether it be in terms of wave energy, whether it be in terms of wind energy. How are we gearing up for later on? And these are all wonderful strengths that we have in our armory. Other basic facilities include oil storage facilities. We've got labor regulations in place. The regulatory frameworks are there. The policy frameworks have been drawn up. Sri Lanka is a vibrant democracy and has been for a long period of time. We are very close to international shipping lanes. We enjoy wonderful climatic conditions, which are extremely suitable, extremely opportune for the building of various forms of industry. These are all factors that we need to take on board. But of course, like I mentioned at the beginning of this particular slide, there's also the weakness side of it. How much have we tapped into the skilled and unskilled labor resources that we have within our country? All our labor that leaves the country, a large part. I mean, research has come out today which talks about unskilled labor that goes out into West Asia being the largest contributor to foreign exchange for this country. How much has been done to explore how much exactly they are going out there to earn? Yes, they are remitting quite a bit to Sri Lanka, But are there other ways and means through which skilled labor could have been sent out to accrue that much more? What has been done in that regard? How are we able to tackle that particular aspect? How much of skilled labor are we keen on sending out? Do we have enough opportunities? Are we exploring enough opportunities out there? And this is where international relations becomes paramount for us to delve into, go deeper into that particular area. Moving on to looking at it from a foreign policy perspective. And this is where, in terms of my analysis, while we talk about the strengths and weaknesses, no doubt threats loom all the time, and we can come to that in the Q&A as well. But I like to look at the opportunities in terms of being a bit more optimistic in rather pessimistic times that we live in. Evolving a foreign policy formula. And we're coming to this point in time where we're going to need to look at, in order to support industry, in order to support commerce within the country, what kind of measures are being taken by the foreign policy establishment? And this is looking at three particular areas: the Indian Ocean region, the 5G, as well as the 11P. And I'll go into what exactly the 5G and the 11P are. So when we talk about the IOR, or the Indian Ocean region, which is on our next slide. When we talk about the Indian Ocean region, we're looking at all countries which belong to IORA, or the Indian Ocean Rim Association. Now, countries that belong to the Indian Ocean obviously share, we are divided by the Indian Ocean, but we're also connected by the Indian Ocean. Whether it be countries in our neighborhood, countries that are in SAARC, countries that are in BIMSTEC, another wonderful resource base for us to build on. All of these countries and us together, we provide immense amount of opportunities for collaboration. IORA took a very informative step of moving forward where we had leaders meeting, and this happened a couple of years ago. Of course, it's usually a grouping that meets at the level of foreign ministers. Now, how much more effort is being put in to ensure that it is at the summit level all the time? Not only at times of the meeting, but in terms of the preparatory work that goes into prior to it, and also the follow-up that takes place thereafter. Reviewing the process of the Indian Ocean region. This is our neighborhood. You and I may not like our neighbors, and we might be able to ship to another house, buy another house. Countries can't do that. We're stuck with our neighbors. We've got to work with our neighbors. We've got to make sure that our neighborhood works. And this is where the Indian Ocean region becomes our first area of priority, because we've got to make sure that in case of a calamity, a disaster, we've seen that through experience. Who are the first countries that come to our defense? Who are the first countries that support us? Who are the first countries that speak out on our behalf? This is where the neighborhood policy becomes extremely relevant in focusing on all countries in the Indian Ocean region. We move then to the next category, and that is talking about the 5G, or like what I like to know as talk about 5 groupings. And this is where Sri Lanka enjoys immense opportunity from these groupings. We look at ASEAN, the Association for Southeast Asian Nations. Sri Lanka tried to join ASEAN, or was on the brink of joining ASEAN back in 1967. For some reason, we did not join. We tried at the end of the 70s. 10 years later, things had changed quite drastically, and we were not an attractive member anymore, or a prospective member, and we did not join. There was a moratorium on membership for a long time. Sri Lanka meets with ASEAN on the sidelines of the ASEAN summit through the ARF, the ASEAN Regional Forum. Now, how much more opportunity exists within the ARF? The ARF brings together countries like North and South Korea, the United States, China. It brings together a whole spectrum of countries who are extremely critical, who are focusing on Southeast Asia. And this is where we have a natural connection with Southeast Asia, not only geographically, but also in terms of BIMSTEC. BIMSTEC is one of our key connecting factors. So this is where we have a golden opportunity there. The African Union just coming up, just rising, new areas of development. Ethiopia, the headquarters of the African Union, changing very, very fast. Integration, working with it, looking for more opportunities. Countries in the African Union are not countries that we turn to when we need support, when we need some kind of international collaboration, when we have a resolution, when we have a vote. That is not when we turn to countries in the African Union. Countries in the African Union need to be worked with, collaborated with. making sure that we stick to that very famous statement of Cardinal Richelieu, which goes back to the 15th or 16th centuries, and he talks about diplomacy being an ongoing process, a durable process, not opportunistic advances. It becomes very apparent when that takes place. The Commonwealth, the third grouping, gaining much more opportunity. The Commonwealth is the only forum through which we see a platform on which political leadership, the business community, the youth of countries, and civil society all converge under one theme, under one topic. Now, this does not happen elsewhere. When you have the political leadership, when you have the business community, the youth, and civil society all participating, no one is left out. You're not leaving out any category of society. You're ensuring inclusivity. That becomes extremely relevant within the Commonwealth. We're going to see the Commonwealth taking on much more impetus in the future, given the fact that the United Kingdom has come out of the European Union and is obviously going to focus a lot more on the Commonwealth. And that is a golden opportunity for Sri Lanka to be able to play a very, very crucial role. Sri Lanka held the chair in office position for 2 years. How much we got out of that chair in office position remains questionable at times. It's similar to BIMSTEC. If you ask someone who is the current chair of BIMSTEC, many wonder. Sri Lanka is chairing BIMSTEC. Have we made maximum use of that opportunity? Has it been something meaningful? Has our presidency been meaningful, or has it become mundane? I'm afraid it's the latter. We talked then about the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, of the SCO. Not very much within the radar, very much under the radar in terms of its operation, its area of activity. Sri Lanka is a dialogue partner, the first dialogue partner going back to 2009. We enjoy very positive relations with some of the main countries within this grouping, China and Russia. You also now have India and Pakistan coming on board as full members, as well as the Central Asian countries, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, and Tajikistan. Now, once these countries have come together, Sri Lanka has a wonderful opportunity to up membership. We've been a dialogue partner for long enough. Other countries are making maximum use of the SCO. It's highly questionable what we have done. But going into the future, the SCO becomes one of the most critical organizations. And of course, the United Nations system, not just the United Nations in New York, but of course, the entire UN system becomes extremely relevant given multilateralism and integration around the world. And finally, I'll end very quickly on my next point, which is talking about the 11P, or the 11 partners, the 11 crucial partners that I would like to highlight. And of course, it's open to debate in terms of other countries joining on. The United States of America, irrespective of what is going on right now within the country, certainly a country that we have to bear in mind, still remains the global leader, a country with which we have immense opportunity. Australia, coming from the Pacific region, Canada, China, coming from the European Union. We need to be focusing on having key partners within the European Union. One of the key access points into the European Union was the United Kingdom. The UK has moved out. Now, what happens to us? How do we interact thereafter? And of course, Germany comes on board as a very crucial partner. Japan, a historic partner. Qatar, a window into West Asia, which is something extremely relevant to us. Russia, a country that is stuck with Sri Lanka through thick and thin, irrespective of what has happened within the country, right after we joined the United Nations and we recognized Russia back in 1957. South Africa, a window into Africa. Thailand, a historically connected country. This is not a country that we lay connection through after independence, but of course a country with which we can look at historic connectivity going back to the times of the kings in terms of religious diplomacy or Buddhist diplomacy that occurred at the time. And Turkey, an economy that is rising, a country that is becoming extremely relevant, and it would be prudent for Sri Lanka to continue to work closely with a country like Turkey. Now, that being said, this is a foreign policy formula that we need to be looking at, which would be extremely beneficial not only for diplomacy and diplomatic connectivity, but something that will accrue more benefits. For the business community to lead, you're going to have to need the state to go on board first, the state to chart the course. The business community will follow. We will find loads of opportunities on that particular platform. So that being said, Rai, can we move to our next speaker? And we will go to Ravi next. Ravi Ratnasabapati. Ravi, over to you,
Ravi, let me just get your presentation ready. In the meantime, please go ahead with your introductory points, and I'll have your presentation ready to go.
Right. So what I'll do is I'll just I run through what I see, a little background introducing how I see the global scenario, and then moving into what implications it has for Sri Lanka, and then look at some of the weaknesses that we have, the threats that we face, and also what strengths we have, and then to see what opportunities this presents to us. So it's basically my view on how on what I think is important in the context of this unprecedented pandemic that we're going through. If we just get on to the next, the one after that. Yes, so as George said, we've never experienced anything like this since the Spanish flu of 1918, and the global data points to the worst slump worldwide since the Second World War. The OECD estimates reductions of about 15% or more in the output throughout the advanced economies and the major emerging market economies. The median decline, they believe, will be about 25%. The World Bank estimates global GDP to contract by 5.2%, and for Sri Lanka 3.2% this year, and for growth to remain at zero next year. Now, I tend to be a bit of a pessimist, so in terms of recovery, I believe the pattern might follow that what we saw after the global financial crisis in 2008. So the recovery of Europe from that crisis was very sickly. So it's going to be a long, slow slog out. Now, what implications does this hold for us? This is going to be we are going to see the first increase in global poverty since 1998, when the Asian financial crisis hit. The World Bank predicts that some 40 to 60 million people are going to be pushed into extreme poverty. In Sri Lanka, we are going to see job losses in tourism. Perhaps 470,000 jobs may be at risk, about 300,000 amongst the exporters. What we don't know is in the domestic sector, the SMEs where there have been and the local companies. We've seen job losses, salary cuts. We have no idea how deep this is, but the little bit I'm hearing is that there's a huge cash crunch amongst businesses, and they're really stuck, finding it very difficult to operate. In terms of poverty, although Sri Lanka's poverty rate is fairly low, 4.1%, below that $1.90 per day, we have 20%, just 20% above that $1.90. We have about 1,000,000 people. So our poverty drop, there about 1,000,000 more additional people can be pushed into poverty. So that's something that the policymakers need to keep in mind, because after all, when we talk of economy and economic development, what we talk about is the reduction of poverty, the reduction of suffering. So there's a danger that poverty will increase. So now, what a pandemic like this does, if you could just move on to the next slide, it really magnifies all the existing weaknesses. It exposes our weaknesses. It magnifies the threats. It puts a lot of stress on your system. So how do you manage when you've got so much stress on it? That's the question. It does, of course, create the pressure for reform. So things that were previously unthinkable can become global. We've seen some remarkable things happening with customs For example, we'll go into that a bit later, but there are reforms that may be possible when your back is against the wall. Now, if we look at our weaknesses, now the response in most of the rich countries has been that the governments are spending enormous amounts of money. But in Sri Lanka, we have weak public finances. We don't have a surplus in the budget, so there's no extra money. We haven't had a surplus from the time of independence. So there's no spare cash around. We are also heavily indebted, so we've already borrowed pretty close to as much as you can get. So we are going into this crisis with our pockets empty. So that's one big weakness. The second thing is that globally you're seeing a tendency for trade barriers to go up, for people to talk about nearshoring, to anti-trade protectionism, but we are compelled to look to exports because we only have a limited domestic market. So if we can't afford to concentrate purely on the domestic market because it's small, so that's going to be a limiting factor. The third thing is when the government's hasn't got a lot of money to spend, we are going to depend on private capital, we are going to depend on foreign investment, but we have lots of red tape, we have corruption, and we have a great deal of policy uncertainty that is strangling investment. So we need to deal with those if we are going to be able to move forward. Now, if we look at our threats, there are, as I said, these are existing threats that are there, but there are two big ones. One's the fact that we have an aging society, and that's going to create fiscal pressure, it's going to slow down growth. We've also got dealing with problems of climate change. If we look at our society, we are one of the most rapidly aging societies anywhere in the world. The percentage of the population over 65 will grow from 7% in 2007 to about 21% by 2045. The people in the working age group, it has now peaked. So now the demographic dividend that comes from a swell in the working age population is now at its maximum. By 2030, that will start to decline. So now we are experiencing these demographic changes, which is the same, very similar to what East Asia is also going through, but we are doing so at a much lower per capita income. So what's happening is we are growing old before we grow rich, right? So there's going to be an increase in the number of chronically ill, the elderly, those with severe disabilities. There's going to be higher cost of pensions, and there's going to be need for elderly care. There's a huge shortage of care homes locally. What's happened is the whole structure of the extended family is no longer there. People are living in small houses. Earlier, children used to look after the parents. That's physically not possible anymore, the way lifestyles have changed. And also things like dementia, Alzheimer's, very difficult to treat at home, very difficult to manage. You've also got the diseases of old age, heart disease, cancer, obesity, hypertension. So there's going to be a lot of pressure on our health system is geared for a very much younger country, so it needs to adjust. There's going to be more spending at a time when you're still trying to deal with the pandemic. On climate change, we are unfortunately the second most affected country according to the Global Climate Risk Index. Floods and droughts have been almost annual events from 2015. And unfortunately, it tends to affect the poorest districts in the dry zone and amongst the hill countries. So the poor get disproportionately affected by the natural disasters that result from climate change. So now, if 2 or 3 years running, you lose all your possessions and your property, people who are just above poverty can again fall back into poverty. So that's another problem. Now, these types of risks, smaller risks, you can be managed at the level of the household. Others, slightly bigger ones at the level of the community. But these are big, complicated risks. So the government intervention, coordination and support is needed. So that's where we need to put in a lot of resources. For example, floods, we'll be looking at, you need to zone the flood floodplain, map out the areas that are subject to flooding. You need to come up with building codes so that people who build build resilient buildings that don't get or have less opportunity to be inundated. You have to discourage certain types of activity there. You need to have wetland conservation because that's the sink into which overflowing rivers will go. There might be a necessity for flood flow modification. Engineering works, again, very complicated things that are very difficult for individuals or the private sector really to handle. So unfortunately, the pressure is on the government, and this is at a time where you've got to deal with the pandemic as well. We spoke about the protectionism earlier. The other problem is that we have a very fractured society. So unfortunately, when all this stress, all this pressure comes on people, we can find it's easy to look for other victims to blame. So we might find a resurgence of ethnic violence, which is something we've seen throughout our post-independent history. Now, if we look at our strengths, it's a point which George mentioned as well. One of our key strengths is that we really are in a very good position in the Indian Ocean. We are right in the middle of all the shipping lines. A lot of trade flows through. So there's a lot of opportunity there. But we need to understand it's a good location, but it's not a critical or vital location. You're not the Panama Canal, you're not the Suez Canal. People don't have to come to you. If you don't make this place an attractive and welcoming place for business, they will just bypass you. The story of the oil tank farm, idle since the Royal Navy were ejected in 1957, is a superb storage facility, completely idle for more than 50 years. Because your legislative and legal framework didn't really permit people to make any use of it. So, to have a good location, but to make it work, we need to have the right policies, the right framework, easy for business. So that's where the opportunities lie. To start fixing, to do the housekeeping. Now it's about the policy uncertainty. That every couple of months, sometimes even more frequently, you get your exchange rate flying all over the place. You've got.
Avi, can I interrupt you for just a second?
Sorry.
We seem to be losing you a bit on your audio. And also it's a little bit low. So if you could get a little bit closer to the mic, I think that should help us.
Right. Do you want me to repeat anything or?
Just the opportunities. You can start with the opportunities. Thank you.
Right. So now to create the problem with this ad hoc taxes, this problem starts with the fact that you have unplanned government expenditure. Now, the way to bring predictability to government expenditure is for the government to plan not for annual budget, for long-term budgets, 3 to 5 year rolling budgets, where the expenditure is fixed by law. So once the expenditure is fixed, then you can fix your taxes. It's when the politicians go out and willy-nilly promise all sorts of things and then scramble around trying to find money that you find that every couple of months you need to go chasing the tax revenue. So these are called medium-term expenditure framework. The World Bank has a lot of skills in this. They've implemented it in a lot of countries across Africa. We do have the legal framework for it in the Fiscal Responsibility Act of 2003. So getting into this, fixing government expenditure will bring predictability to the tax system. It will also make your inflation, if your budget deficit is stable, your inflation becomes stable, your interest rates might also stabilize, and then with it you need to do some reform with the central bank to control or ban money printing, because it's the money printing that causes the exchange rate to go. So once you've got stable taxes, stable exchange rates, reasonably predictable interest rates, and inflation for investment, it gives a certain degree of confidence. Now, we have to exploit our position on in the Indian Ocean. The trick is, if you look at Singapore's success, it's not just building infrastructure that matters. It is the infrastructure, it is the processes, it is the connectivity, and it is private sector participation that makes everything come together. If you look at connectivity, you need frequent air links and ship links. Shipping line needs to keep calling. So the Singapore port has extensive agreements with major shipping lines. So there are lots of frequent ships that call. They have over 130 open air traffic arrangements so that they are well connected by air. They have over 30 FTAs signed, which makes it easy to trade goods. So that connectivity is also needed along with the infrastructure. You also need to have good processors. Now, the single window process, that's a good opportunity. The system has been mapped, the issues have been identified, the reports have been given to the government, detailed studies over 2 years have been done and given last year. Now the government only needs to implement it. Due to the pandemic, customs has actually started processing some part of the Cusdex through online systems, automate your processes. At the same time, there's the new Customs Act that which is drafted, that has not yet been passed. That cleans up some of the legal frame. The unified labor law, a lot of archaic regulations have been consolidated into one thing, again drafted, but not implemented. In terms of validation, the first stage in the logistics chain, the preliminary studies were done and given, I think a year and a half ago or something, to the government. Again, they identified things like unclear licensing regulations, opacity in rules, operations are being confined only to the port premises, arbitrary port fees and charges as being some of the barriers. Complete those studies. They were not done by government expenditure. It was done by an international body that was paid for by donor funding. Get those studies completed and implement these things. So those are the processes that are necessary to make the infrastructure work. Regional trade, again, there's a lot of opportunity there. Countries generally trade with their region. In East Asia, about 50% of all trade is regional. In Sub-Saharan Africa, about 22% of all trade is regional. But in South Asia, it's only 5%. We sit next to the largest market outside of China, and we regard it as a threat. So we do have the FTAs, but the problems are actually with non-tariff barriers, with standards, with lab testing, there are all sorts of nitty-gritty things, particularly on the Indian side, that are holding up trade. So there were departments earlier within the form of MONSIT that were working with the Indian counterparts, trying to eliminate these non-tariff barriers to make trade easy. So that needs to be fast-tracked. You need to try to work on eliminating where these bottlenecks, so that you can start trading more in your region. Particularly important if again you find that markets in the West are beginning to close up. There's a lot of potential here. One thing that might open up is if people start nearshoring the factories, taking them, trying to take them back into the West. You find the cost of production goes to somehow reduce costs. So to try to help so BPO, IT services, knowledge processing, we have good telecoms connectivity. We need to see whether there's opportunities there. Then again, there's bottlenecks with lack of critical skills, not enough of the right graduates coming. So there are issues there, but there are opportunities to address this as well. And there may be some opportunity with light manufacturing if it moves out of attracting it here, but you're competing with a lot of others, including Vietnam, which is already well linked there. So there may be So it's going to be a bit more tricky there, but there may be something. So that's basically, I would say in sum, it's a very difficult situation that we face. We are going in with on a weak foot. Policymakers need to play their cards very carefully to try and use the opportunity productively to make the right kind of reforms that will make trade happen and make life easy for business. Sorry.
George, we can't hear you. You're muted.
Sorry. You touched on some very, very vital points, Ravi. You raised that whole issue about poverty. I think we talk about poverty eradication. Sometimes we wonder whether poverty can be eradicated or maybe only alleviated. We're looking at the crunch becoming that much stronger. You talked about weak public finance. You were talking about the heavy borrowing that we have experienced. And of course, this aging population. And I think when we talk about the psychosocial aspects, I think Saroshi can also come on board at that point and go deeper into looking at that area. And you made a very interesting point where you said we're growing old before we grow rich. And this is probably becoming one of the most critical factors. We're growing older as a country. We're growing older as individuals, as communities. How are we dealing with this? How are we responding to that? And also, I mean, location. Sorry. Yes, Ravi, please chip in.
We seem to be having a little bit of trouble with Ravi's connectivity. He was cutting out even while he was speaking, and I think he has frozen on screen right now. Oh, there he is. Ravi, your mic is on mute. We're not hearing what you're saying.
Sorry. I put it on mute because I think I lost George for a few minutes, but I think basically he was talking about how we are all getting old now.
Yeah, I mean, and that's very important. Of course, you used a very good example that, you raised the example of Singapore. I mean, lots of times we keep comparing ourselves to Singapore. But one thing that we don't realize is that compared to Singapore, I mean, we are a country which have way more resources. We've got so much more in terms of natural resources, in terms of land, in terms of sea. Are we there yet? Well, these are countries that prospered very well when we were having the conflict. I mean, places like Dubai, places like Singapore did really well, thanks to problems that we had over here. And this is where it's a pretty tough world out there, and we've got to look at opportunities that we are going to grab. We're going to have to make hay while the sun shines, and we're going to look for opportunities in which we are going to be able to do that. And I guess sometimes we don't always capture the importance of that. And that last point you mentioned, talking about regions, it goes very much under the radar. We don't focus enough on our regional advantages that we enjoy. Intra-regional trade within the SAARC region is so low in compared to the European Union or ASEAN or any of the other regional groupings. These are all factors that we obviously have to take on board. But thank you very much, Ravi, and we will come back to you unless you want to say something right now. Otherwise, we'll come back to you in the Q&A section.
No, I'm fine. Yes. No, that's fine. I lost you for a few minutes, but no issue. When you come back with questions, we can clarify what.
Sure. We'll take that on board. So we'll move to Dr. Ruan Senathilaka next. Dr. Ruan, over to you in terms of speaking to us and looking at it from a medical perspective and the future, a SWOT analysis there.
Yeah. So good evening, organizers. Thank you very much for inviting. So I'll try to make my presentations in the next 10 to 12 minutes, where I intend to present a SWOT analysis from a medical perspective as we faced the COVID-19 pandemic, the journey so far. Topic is, I think, very timely and relevant. And we all so far have realized how ill-prepared we were in facing this, COVID-19 with large number of patients or people in the world falling prey to this situation, where we have more than 7 million affected people right now with more than 400,000 deaths. So I'll move one by one, starting with strengths. Now, as you are aware, the first bullet point I'm referring to, as you are aware, Sri Lanka is a country which offers free healthcare to all its citizens. This has been considered as a national priority by all successive governments since independence. That itself is a huge plus as far as our people's ability to pay is concerned. Now, not many people can afford to come to the private sector to have access to healthcare. It's also important to realize that all citizens in this country can have access to a government health facility within 5 kilometers anywhere from Sri Lanka. It's a huge plus point. And our public health system, which had to bear the brunt of this campaign, which comprises of epidemiology unit mainly and medical officers of health, popularly known as MOHs, and public health inspectors, popularly known as PHIs, all worked as a team, a closely knit team to bring the desired public health outcomes which we have witnessed so far. And also Sri Lanka's health indicators are comparable to those of the more developed countries in the region. Another definitive strength is Sri Lanka's qualified healthcare staff, be it doctors, nurses, midwives, MLTs, radiographers, whoever it is. I mean, they are the people who actually gave a strength in this hour of need. Then, in spite of many resource constraints, we have been able to maximally utilize whatever the available resources. And also as a nation, I see a common factor where culturally we are a nation which comprises of people who are very compassionate, who will come out to help another person in times of crisis. So Sri Lankans by that nature actually teamed up well with fellow citizens to rise to the occasion. Then our strongest, I think at this moment, our strongest strength probably would be the focused political leadership, amply supported by state health officials, armed forces, with their military intelligence, maybe for the first time, and the public of this country, which actually fell in line with the government's, regulations, can be considered as the biggest strength in curbing this COVID menace. Public awareness was created by this team from day one, and all necessary administrative infrastructures were placed in place from day one, from the inception. So these were the strengths that I consider were important in fighting against COVID in the journey so far. Then the weaknesses. As you all know, Sri Lanka has a limited critical care facilities. Especially when it comes to intensive care unit facilities. Number of intensive care unit beds in Sri Lanka is around 550 to 600. And there is low expenditure on health as a percentage of GDP. Also, another weakness is that there is a shortfall in all categories of hospital staff. Now, public sector, as you know, has an inadequate capacity and limited access to specialist treatment, and there's a long waiting list if one is to undergo advanced procedures. On the other hand, the private health sector is predominantly centered in Colombo. Sri Lanka spending a meager approximately 3% of GDP on healthcare, government is not in a position to procure high-end healthcare facilities for its people, whether it's diagnostic or curative. And lack of PPE, personal protective equipment, which we all are familiar nowadays, our masks, our goggles, hand washes, boots, covers, all that, your costume, everything that you witness when you step into a hospital nowadays, all that were, we didn't have enough actually when the pandemic hit us. And the other important thing is that research, the place research has in this whole pandemic scene, research plays a big role in finding answers to our pressing issues, although may become available much later. What we have witnessed is that it is hard to find, donations, cash inflows, pumping money to do enough research in this country, especially with regard to some other medical breakthroughs. Hope and pray that in the future that we will be able to have enough resources so that we can do our research in our universities and research centers in order to make a breakthrough in coming to terms with this type of pandemics. Then this again, when I switch on to opportunities, let me have the opportunities slide on. Globally, scientists and health professionals are on a kind of an unstoppable race on COVID research, expecting a major breakthrough. Sri Lankan scientists and professionals, therefore, I think has a great opportunity to join them in their international collaborations, some of which I'm proud to say are headed by our own Sri Lankans. Then, as we know, finding of a new vaccine to tackle this menace is the only thing that we can think of right now on a long-term basis, although it may take few more years, till it becomes available largely for the general masses. Hospital infrastructures, what we witnessed was definitely need modification. Accordingly, to accept large number of patients within a short span, which we witnessed, 2 months back. And also, we never thought that we would require this many number of rooms or wards or beds to have isolation facilities in order to prevent the infections from spreading to other people nearby. And also negative pressure rooms, such things all fall into infrastructure facilities. We witnessed that we are falling, behind the required standards or required numbers rather. So this COVID-19 situation gave us an opportunity to also to educate our staff with regard to infection control and preventive measures and laboratory facilities in order to diagnose COVID-19 became extremely in short supply. Although some of the private hospitals had the facility to offer to the public, but for certain reasons, till recently, it was approved. Till the green light was given, we were not in a position to make use of that facility. Then we come to the reputation part of Sri Lanka. Now, Sri Lanka is a country which gained good reputation for its effective management of COVID-19 situation. I have seen in media, a lot of international experts talking, very positively about Sri Lankan experience. Sri Lanka also earned a reputation for its hospitality due to, probably you all would have witnessed, short video clips published through, social media globally by groups, who visited, Sri Lanka, and also due to the publicity given by some of the UK tour operators, in media, or rather on TV, BBC, we used to see, how they commented that Sri Lanka currently is the best country to be in this period. So these are some of the opportunities which I can think of, when it comes to the COVID thing. And lastly, on the opportunity thing, the whole country actually witnessed, how innovative some of our Sri Lankans have been in the recent past. We saw over the TV, over media, new medical equipment. Example, ventilators, such complicated equipment. Then personal protective equipment, then robots, delivering, drugs in the hospital, IDH. As such, we urge actually the government to provide them, all these young people, with necessary assistance to improve their innovations. This, in the long run, can save a lot of, foreign exchange. So these are the opportunities. Then I quickly move on to the threats. Anybody without argument will accept that death or loss of life was the most evident, threat to the human beings, during this period. Although there was a significant morbidity also arising from this. Thanks to effort by all concerned, Sri Lanka managed to contain this disease to a great extent. As you all are aware, when one gets COVID, out of the number of people who would have contracted the disease, 5% are expected to become critically ill, which finally requires intensive care facilities. So the health authorities, knowing this situation, took all possible precautions to keep the number of critically ill people low. Because if we exceed a certain number of sick people in the country, 5% out of that, if that number exceeds a small number of 600 acute care, critical care beds with ventilators, we would have been in deep trouble. So then the impact on economy, that also was a threat, because we were confined to homes, not many people worked. So impact on economy due to loss of productive work was a significant threat. Lack of revenue led many commercial establishments to take drastic steps such as layoffs, pay cuts, cancellation of overtime payments, etc., to be brought in to counter the situation. And the whole world witnessed how helpless and ill-prepared every country, including some of the most developed countries in the world, how sad it was the way we took on the coronavirus pandemic. There was absolutely no weapon suitable in the form of a medicine or in the form of a vaccine to use against this. Then another point is that as disease-causing organisms, be bacteria, virus or anything, they're capable of changing the outlook, which we call a mutation in medical terms. This can render all treatment thus far we have achieved or breakthroughs we have made in terms of treatment useless. So the scientific community was facing this dilemma as to how effectively in the long run we would be possible to treat effectively the patients affected with coronavirus. Because by the time you come up with a solution, the virus may have changed its outlook, rendering treatment useless. So this was a huge threat actually. Then the mere lockdown affected so many badly, making them really handicapped in many ways. Some did not have a reasonable income even to buy their own medicine, bare minimum. And soon fell ill, which developed to the extent of requiring hospital admissions. We witnessed that. Then many healthcare institutions had to continue their routine work with suboptimal number of staff, maybe due to lack of transport facilities, maybe due to stress of overwork, maybe due to fear of contracting the disease. All may have contributed. Then lastly, on this point of threats, domestic violence, acute psychological disturbances, depression, all these were on the rise, and many people had to seek treatment, developed to that extent. So these are some of the strengths, weaknesses, strengths and weaknesses are inherent to the system. They are internal. Opportunities, threats will come from outside. So maybe as lay people, many would have experienced and would have wondered as to how the medical fraternity, along with the other parties that I mentioned, managed to come so far with great success, I suppose. It's too preemptive for me to say that we have come out victorious, but because the climax is yet to come, it's far from being over. Then about the industries that were directly affected or that directly had an opportunity in this whole scenario of Corona, is that I'll take one by one quickly. The pharmaceutical industry. Now, every one of us know that personal protective equipment and these sanitizer solutions and gels, which usually are sold in pharmacies, suddenly found a new market. And overnight you saw, so many people by the side of the road selling all these things in their hundreds. So pharmaceutical industry actually had great potential to come up with quality products in order to, cater to the demand. Then 70% of the pharmaceutical imports actually, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned, are coming from countries like India, Pakistan and Bangladesh, which actually reduce their production. So to that extent, our supply was hampered. And also on top of that, we got these dollar fluctuations, dollar rates. And there was a 10 to 20% of increase in price. So pharmaceutical industry, at least the giants, in the game, I think are working tirelessly to find a drug or mainly a vaccine. And if it is found, you hit a gold mine, because that's the only hope that we'll have right now. Then the IT, the software development industry is earning huge revenues. Now Zoom, share prices have been increased by 30% during the past 2 months. Huge increases in number of subscribers. Same goes with Microsoft Teams. And webinar services, gaming and videos, all, because more people are at home till very recently. Pubs, clubs, theaters, beaches, holidays, all have disappeared. So naturally, they'll have to find some sort of, entertainment. Then the robotics, drug delivering robotics, that industry, we saw in China how they managed to get the help of robots to supply drugs to each individual in taking inward facility in hospitals. Also Netflix and YouTube again on entertainment thing, hugely profitable these days. And lastly, the insurance. Actually, when this pandemic hit us, none of the companies had in their insurance policies a cover for COVID. Soon rising to the situation, I think large majority of the insurance companies now have introduced COVID cover as well. So these are some of the industries which had a role to play and which they are playing right now in a big way, as this pandemic is not over yet. So I think this is a synopsis of what I have to say with regard to the medical perspectives, the strengths, weaknesses, objectives and trends are concerned in this backdrop of COVID-19. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. You touched on a fabulous array of topics, especially going to those strengths. And this is something that we take for granted. We don't realize it in terms of the free healthcare facility, which is a huge plus. And all kudos to the medical sector. I mean, you tried to play it down a bit, but certainly you mentioned that we have a limited number of ICU units. Had this gone out of proportion, had this not been controlled, had this not been nipped in the bud when it was, we would have had a catastrophe in this country. We came very close to it. But of course, it was timely intervention. It was the involvement of the medical fraternity, bringing on board the military, bringing on board the PHIs, bringing on board intelligence, whatever sectors were involved. We averted a massive crisis. And that's something that we must never forget. People must always be very mindful of that. We now seem to be going around as though there was no COVID. We seem to have forgotten what it was. We don't seem to be too concerned about it. There was a time we were scared to touch a particular item. We wanted to wash products. We don't do that anymore. It's very, very dangerous at times. But this is where that particular point that you raised about what we have within the country. We have lots of problems. We have lots of weaknesses. We have long lists for advanced procedures. We have all those challenges. But certainly the fact that any and everybody is able to walk into a hospital, avail themselves of these opportunities, and you had also established that particular number to call. I mean, that was a huge benefit to so many people. To call, talk about their symptoms without having to visit hospitals. I mean, and in Sri Lanka, what we don't realize as opposed to other countries was in Sri Lanka, many people were able to go to hospital or go into quarantine centers, go into isolation units, etc. In other countries, you were asked to stay at home. You were asked to self-isolate. You were asked to manage on your own, and hopefully you survive. If it becomes a crucial moment, then emergency services would take you away. But that, I mean, certainly that was a very important point. And also you raised a very interesting thing about inventions. Innovation, I mean, we saw this on like a daily basis almost. The new medical innovations coming out from engineering students, from the medical fraternity, which is something that we really need to focus on in the future. Not only in terms of helping our own health sector, but also in terms of exports in the future. This is where we should look at fine-tuning those products, taking them to another level to be of export quality. That would really, really have a huge impact. So thank you very much, Dr. Wan. We'll come back to you in the Q&A as well with Rai. And we move now to Siroshi Nandasiri. Siroshi, over to you. And we'd love to hear from you.
Right. Siro, before you take over, let me just interrupt for a tiny second. Just to remind all our viewers, we have a poll running at the moment. This will help us to curate our topics going forward, as well as in terms of deciding on the times, what is most convenient to you. I know that we're returning to some semblance of normality. So whereas during our last 2 months of hosting these webinars, we've always had them between from 4 o'clock onwards. I realize that now you may be traveling at that time, you may be still in your office, you may be now having other meetings going on at that time. So one of the questions we have up there is for you to maybe share with us your thoughts on what time we should have these webinars. So I do urge you to go ahead and click on the answers in the poll so that it gives us a better idea of how we can bring these resources to you. Siro, over to you.
Right. Thank you, George. Thank you, Rai, and thank you, AmCham, for inviting us. And I think this is like an amazing platform and an initiative that you have taken to develop a strategic level SWOT. And you have asked different people from different sectors to come in and to share knowledge and to share the experience and the expertise. So I think it's amazing. Having said that, I would like to tell a story here. And my story, I'm going to divide it into 3 areas. First, you can talk about Sri Lankan socio-cultural SWOT without understanding the Sri Lankan culture and the values. Culture is driven by the values, and the culture shapes the people's lives, the leadership, and every aspect. So values are like the foundation in any society. So I'm going to talk a bit about the cultural values we uphold. We can't judge whether there are strengths or weaknesses. It's just who we are. So we got to understand that first. Then in the second part of my story, I'm going to talk about 5 key trends, which I see as important trends in the macro environment related to socio-cultural aspect. And then I'm going to extract 2 very predominant strategic level opportunities, which I would like to propose to our business fraternity and of course to the macro level policymakers to basically focus on. Right, so what are the Sri Lankan cultural values? Right, if you look at Sri Lankan cultural values, we have a high power distance. We are power driven. And also we are hierarchy driven. We like hierarchies. We like structures. We are all, we like to be centralized, right? We don't like to go like decentralized. We like centralized. And also we always look up to our leaders. That's why there is a saying in Sri Lanka, Sri Lankans are waiting for Dear Senkumara, right? We want these leaders to come in, right? We love our leaders and we look up for these leaders. So we are like more of a sort of like a power culture, very centralized, very hierarchy driven, right? Sort of a culture. But we love to work in teams, right? We are very collective, we are very interdependent, right? So we work in these teams, groups, right? That's who we are. And also our culture is very feminist. It's very it's like a very it's very low in terms of masculinity. We love caring for each other. That's why when companies started to cut down on the salaries, we would go on your Facebook and your social media, and we would say, whoa, these companies are cutting on the salaries, or these companies are letting go of the staff and stuff, because we care, right? We care. And also we focus on quality of life. We want free time, we want flexibility, we want all of that. Now that's one of the reasons why Sri Lankans don't like systems, structures. We like hierarchy. Well, we have the leader, but we also don't like, in one corner, we also don't like these sort of the systems and which restricts you in certain ways. So we like this.
Don't you think that's what you're looking for? We like the system, but we don't like the niti.
There you go. Yes, we don't like these things. We don't like to be in little cubicles, right? We don't like to be in restricted. We don't like restrictions, rules and regulations. We don't like, right? We like flexibility, but we also like these hierarchies and things like that. So it's quite complex, our culture. We are hot, but we are really not cold. We are somewhere in between. And also, if you look at our focus in terms of taking on uncertainties and risks, we are very medium on that. We take risks, but not so much of risk. We are okay in taking or facing uncertainties, but we are sometimes not so much okay, right? We like normalcy. So we're in between that. And also our orientation in terms of our long-term orientation, long-term futuristic view, we have a very medium sort of a perspective towards the long-term orientation. So this is who we are, right? This is who we are. We can't say we are wrong. We can't say we are right. This is who we are. We need to first understand these underlying values that we have. So you would see a lot of organizations or the rest of the world thinks like Sri Lanka is part of South Asian region. So they're one of these South Asians. We are really not South Asia, right? Because if you look at our Human Development Index, we are far ahead. But in terms of numbers, we are, in terms of HDI, we are quite similar to or in par with the East Asia. But in terms of numbers, we are really not there yet. So it's a complex culture that we have here in Sri Lanka. It's a beautiful culture. It's beautiful values that we have, but a little bit complex for an outsider to understand. That is one of the reasons why when you see a lot of outsiders coming in as country heads or managing directors, there is a tendency of them failing, not because they are not dexed or anything like that, simply because they don't understand these values. Because for an outsider, it could be quite complex as well. right? In certain ways, we are like, hierarchy driven. We like centralization and all of that, but then we don't like being limited. We like flexibility. So we are like, in two different corners sometimes we are in the middle. So that's sort of the environment or the cultural values that we have. So in this context now, we love for our leaders to be there, right? We look up for our leaders. We want our leaders. But on the same time, the leader should know, right, we as a nation cannot grow if the leader does not delegate. It is up to the leader, right, to create a culture of delegation and empowerment. Because you need a second and a third level. You need your generals to come in, right? But if you go with this same system of system that we have at the moment, right? Keeping all the power to yourself and you driving everything on your own, this won't work. That is one of the reasons why Sri Lanka has failed so far. Right? We actually blame it on politicians. We blame it on the leadership, right? But actually speaking, we have really not understood these cultures that we work with. That's one of the key reasons. So leaders, we need to really get into the habit of developing our people, empowering our people, and delegating. Because no economy, no country will be able to grow, move forward if you do not build your second line, right? So that's my first part of the story, that is understanding our key values, right? Then I'm going into the second part of my story, which is the 5 key trends that I see in the socio-cultural environment of Sri Lanka. First one that I'm going to talk to you about is the Sri Lankan middle class. We have a growing middle class. Now, if you look at our income distribution, our richest 20% own about 50% of our national income, right? And our poorest 20% own about 4 to 5% of the income. Huge disparity. But our middle class, they comprise of 60%, and then they account for about 44% of the income. So we have quite a large middle class in Sri Lanka. And also, mind you, we are a middle income country. We are in the range of $4,100 US, right? People might say, wow, that's great, amazing, right? Because it's a strength. I think it's a weakness. And it could also be a threat for us. Because when your income is 4,100, when we are a middle income country, what happens is you don't have access, right? Unlike when you are in the lower income category, you don't have access to cheap funding, right? Your funding is limited. You don't have access to cheap funding. And also, when your income goes up, your cost of capital will go up because you have to go onto the market and borrow. Also, your production cost goes up, right? So inflation comes into play. So all of these things contribute towards your cost of production. Your cost of production will have an impact when you are focusing on your exports. Your exports will be quite expensive as well, and you thereon will lose your competitive edge in the world market. And also, if you look at your average income, it's about, for a household, we have roughly about 4 people in a household, 3 to 4 people actually, and only 50% of these 3 to 4 people participate in economic activity. That is about 50%, 52% to be exact. And average household income is about 60,000, but the median income is about 45,000. So a lot of people are below the average income of 60,000. So a lot of people get about 45,000. And of course, if you look at our economic participation, we have 21 million people in the country. And about 52% participate actively in the economy. And remember, of our population, 52% are women. And unfortunately, women's economic participation is only 3-1. So in economics, we learn about utilizing our resources to the maximum. What about this important human capital, human resource? It's a waste. If you keep your female population, if you keep your productive female population at home, then the whole country is suffering because of that. And also, we have an aging population issue, right? Population is aging. We have limited number of people to work. When your economic participation, if you take 50 out of the population, 52% out, and from that 52%, only 1 in 3 are working, it's a pure waste in the economy. So that is a huge weakness that we have. And of course, that will be a threat as well in the coming future. So I see a huge potential opportunity here where an untapped market, untapped resource can be put into use. And also, we have a high rural population. 75% of Sri Lanka is living in the outskirts, rural areas, right? A lot of people question about these roads, right? Roads being done up and all that. But have we really thought about it, right? What is the strategy behind road construction? Apart from all this corruption and all of that, you need a good road connectivity, because all these 75% of, don't forget, 75% of our economy, of our population is rurally based. So we need this important population also contributing towards your economic development. So you need a lot of roads coming in, road connectivity. We can't be spending about 6-7 hours going from one corner in the country to the other corner. You should be able to go there within a couple of hours. I mean, how inefficient is our economy, right? If we have to do that. So this is an opportunity. This is also, if you don't seize on this opportunity to develop this aspect, we will actually lose on, and that could act as a threat in the future. And also, we have a single-digit poverty. And one of the strengths we have is we have rare extreme poverty in Sri Lanka. Now, poverty, if you look at in India or in the South Asian region, their poverty and our poverty are quite different, right? We calculate poverty using the poverty lines. But sometimes we don't factor in some of the social areas. Like, for example, now when COVID came in, right, all of us ran out of food, especially in the urban areas. But people in the rural areas were quite comfortable. Why? Because they had their kos and del and polos and all that, pol and all that in their backyards, right? So simplistic living. They could live on, they could bet on, unlike the people in the urban areas. So your extreme poverty is also in Sri Lanka is quite low. And also, I want to highlight a few things. In Sri Lanka, still, we have people using kerosene light about 3%. We have about 11% of our people without safe drinking water. We have about 4 to 8% of our population without proper standard housing, right? We have about 1/3 of our population without any vehicles, right? Also, we have about 20% of our population who are not using any electrical items, and about 25%. 1/4 of our population go only up to grade 5 schooling. So this is a context in which we are trying to analyze the socio-cultural impact of these factors. So for the corporate fraternity, if you are doing your CSR, for the corporate fraternity, if you want to do philanthropy, right, these are areas that you should go into. And also don't do just one-off things. Take one area, right, and build on it. right, invest on it, because these are factors that are really connected to your socio-cultural environment, and that can actually help the government to really develop these areas as well. Right, I'm moving on to the second trend that I see. That is our Human Development Index. Now, our Human Development Index is quite high. Out of 1, we are 0.77, quite high. It's a good factor, it's a strength. And as a result of this, right, this is resultant from the high literacy level that we have, 93%, right? And also our life expectancy is 75. I think women live longer than men. So it's around 75 years. But there is a big but here. Do you know that about 70% of our population only go up to grade 10? Right? 3% don't even go to school. About 23-25% go only up to grade 5, right? And another 40 plus goes only up to grade 10. So 70%. When I knew about this, I was like really triggered. Wow, really? 93% literacy rate, and about 70% of our population goes only up to grade 10. And also, if you really look at the prisoner numbers, right? Something that I really love to analyze on. This is a wasted resource, prisoners in Sri Lanka. We never talk about those people. But if you're really analyzing your social, cultural environment, you need to look at these people as well, right? About 50% of the prisoners who go into the prison, right? They are under 6 months of imprisonment. They serve only 6 months. Right, so they go for a very short tenure, and about 80% go there for other felonies, like under other categories. It's not a theft or like a murder or nothing categorized. It's for those like minor things. 80%, and most of these people, right, they are undereducated or not so very much educated, and they are also having issues in terms of like it could be unemployment, it could be like some sort of they are under those sort of influence as well. And also 90% of these prisoners belong to your economic the labor force. So it's a huge waste. So if you don't take these prisoners into account, right, if you don't we can actually train them, we can productively use them rather than, right, taking a huge land in a prime location in Sri Lanka, you're just taking people. Rather than doing that, I think it is high time the government takes some sort of policy level decision to use this important resource in a productive way. We need to punish people. We need to have law and order, but let's do it in a more productive way. And also, if you look at in terms of unemployment, right? It's at 4%, but because of COVID, we know that I can take an example from the apparel industry. We have about 300,000 people directly employed in the apparel industry and 600K indirectly working in the apparel industry. And about 70-75% of them are females. And from all the information we are getting, we are expecting, and actually it's happening at the moment, we will see about 25-30% of job loss. So then these numbers will go haywire, right? These numbers will change. So what are we going to do about these number of people who are going to be unemployed? There is a huge opportunity for these people to be converted, because most of these people, if you are coming from a good corporate, right, if you are they will offer you VRS, voluntary retirement scheme. So they will come out with some capital. So why not the government have some sort of a mechanism, right, macro level mechanism to convert them into entrepreneurs? There is a huge opportunity that we can actually convert these people. And also, if you go to my next trend, that is our changing lifestyle, right? I told you, usually the income, the average income of a household is roughly about 60,000 rupees. But the median value is 45,000 rupees. If you really analyze our expenditure, averagely a household will spend about 55,000 a month. That's the average expenditure per household. Now, if you further analyze this 55,000, you will see we spent 20,000 on food, and we spent 35,000 on non-food items. Out of the 20,000 food items, right, 50%, that is about 10,000 rupees, we spend on your essentials. That is your rice, your milk, your fish, your vegetables, your flour. Those are the things that are essential. So you spend about 50% on those items. You would recall that the government gave 5,000 during the COVID time for the people to bet on. So it is spot on, because you need about 10,000, right? Within about 10,000, you can actually survive. That's the rationale behind this 5,000s which the government gave out to the people. And if you really look at the non-food items, right, out of non-food items, 35,000, 50% you spend on your transport, your communication, your education, and on your housing, those kind of aspects. So if you really look at, right, 35,000, you only need 50%, right, non-food items. 20,000, you need only 50%. If you really take it out, you only need about 40,000 to live, right? So, but we have a high consumption. We have a lot of wastage also. So that is one of the reasons why we keep on telling, oh, we don't have money, we don't have savings, we don't have, we don't have enough money to invest in anything, right? If you get into this habit of saving some money, right? Now you have about 60,000. If you spend about 35,000, right? If you manage your expenses very well, you will have a little amount which you can save and which you can invest. You need to invest. Saving alone won't help you. You should get into the habit of investing, right? Sri Lankans, that's a problem Sri Lanka has, right? Sri Lankans go and put the money in the banks. So the banks, we have a lot of the times, we have many commercial banks. We have very limited development banks. So when you go and put the money into the commercial banks, you expect higher interest rates. So when you expect higher interest rates from the bank's lending rate will be about 15%, because they can't give at 1 or 2%. Right? So we need to get into this habit. This is an ideal opportunity we have. This is a weakness we have, but we need to convert this weakness into an opportunity where we actually start investing. Invest in building a business of yours. Start in investing, maybe carefully investing in the stock market. Start investing in assets which are growing in valuation. So this is a great time for us to have that investor mindset as well in terms of as people. And also, I told you our consumption pattern is very, very you have a lot of wastage. Now, I was involved with the development of a coconut strategy for the coconut industry of Sri Lanka. And one of the things the coconut industry was very much worried about was that we use it for consumption. Most of our production is used for consumption. So there is very limited amount for export. Out of the consumption also, there is huge wastage. Now, why wastage? Now, let's say we have... Sorry. Yeah, I went muted. Sorry about it. In terms of coconut, when you take coconut home, you scrape it and then you blend it, right? And then you take the milk and then the residue you throw. But in an industrial setup, you can extract oil from that. You can use that residue for something else. So nothing is wasted, right? So our consumption patterns will also have to change a bit. And these are great opportunities for companies to create in terms of entrepreneurship, right? These are opportunities. Tell our people, right, don't worry about now. You will have a lot of millennials coming in as now they're entering into families, the households. Now they're taking on leadership positions, especially in the corporate sector and even from the household front. So people like us, we don't like to, go home and, like scrape coconut and blend coconut and all that. So you need to have, this is an opportunity for the corporate fraternity to come up with value-added products. But value-added products has to come in very competitively. It cannot be very expensive. Now, when I take coconut home and when I do on my own, and when I take from the outside, the cost shouldn't have so much of a difference. Otherwise, you will not be able to survive or bring out your ideas or value additions profitably. So you have to bring those in a more sustainable, value-adding manner into the society. So wastage is, again, I think it's a weakness, but there is definitely a huge chance for us to convert that as an opportunity. And also, this is an ideal time for all of us to get together and to analyze our value chain, our supply chain and our value chain. Look at areas where you can add value. Look at areas where you can actually cut down on costs. Our cost is too much, right? We have a lot of wastage. So we need to really go back and see where we can be lean, right? Where we can be lean, cut down on cost to be competitive. And also, you would see when you look at our exports, we have a very low export orientation. Most of the countries, like Singapore, right? They have a higher export orientation. If you analyze our exports, you would see that about 60% of our exports are exported to 10 countries. 10 countries, right? And 75% of our imports are from 10 countries. So effectively, if you really analyze those 20 countries, they're effectively only 14 countries. So we are dealing with, right, in terms of import and export, we are actually dealing with only 14 countries. That's very highly risky, right? And also, you have not been able to expand into other areas as well. We have lost a good opportunity, right? And also this shows our macro level weak trade policies and negotiations, right? And if we can't negotiate with 14 countries and come into like effective trade treaties and agreements, and if we can't manage that, that shows that negatively reflects on your trade policy. And also, if you look at
Saroshi, on that point.
Sorry?
Saroshi, on that point, if I could just jump in at that point, Saroshi, could we take up some of these in the Q&A? We're having a slight issue with the running for time, but
yes,
we're kind of over time, but we would really want to listen to this, especially some of the way you're going into, the Human Development Index context, etc. Very, very important from a socioeconomic perspective as well as a psychosocial perspective. If we could take that up in the Q&A, we will come back right after that point.
We will do that, yes. And also, in terms of changing lifestyles, you have global Sri Lankans also coming in, right? Global Sri Lankans, you have baby boomers are going out, and you have millennials coming in. So those are like areas that we need to keep a tab, because they can be, if you don't really manage them properly, those can be threats. Managed well, opportunities for you. And if I move on to the Sri Lankan attitudes, my next the trend is that we have a very sort of a small market mentality, right? And we have scale in the region. For example, Bangladesh, you have 8 times of Sri Lanka. India is 65 times of Sri Lanka, right? And Pakistan is about 10 times of Sri Lanka. So we have scale in the region, or even in the East Asian region. But we think small. We only think Sri Lanka. So I think this is an ideal opportunity for us to think globally, right? Big. And also, in terms of, we have this nostalgic impact. We always dwell on our past things, right? Now, for example, sometime back, I was heading Sri Lanka tourism, the events team, and we were given a target of 2.5 million when we were doing less than 500,000. Now Sri Lanka has achieved that, but still we show the tourists the same Sigiriya, right? But if you go to other countries, like for example, in England you have a place called Stratford-upon-Avon, right? And that entire area is Shakespeare's, they actually use Shakespeare, and that entire area, every value point is converted to customer touch points, and they create value. But we have great stuff here, so we actually don't develop on those. Without disturbing the culture, without disturbing the livelihoods, we have to figure out a way where we actually develop on these aspects as well. And also I need to touch base on another area here, that is ethnocentrism. In terms of Sri Lankan attitudes, we are very ethnocentric at the moment. Ethnocentric because we now go with, in full swing for all locally made. So if you're an organization, if you're a company who are coming from outside, I think it's high time that you have a more of a localized approach to counter the ethnocentrism in the market. And my next trend that I want to discuss in the socio-cultural environment is population aging. Now here, India has the highest youth population. Now they have about 1/3 of their population is young. And this 1/3 is from a billion plus population. So they have the supply of young people, talented young people to the entire world, right? Whereas Sri Lanka, we don't have much young people, right? Population is aging. But countries like China, right? They have seen this, they have taken decisions. Now China lifted their policy on one-child policy to 2. Europe, they have skill migration, they facilitate that, right? So they have taken action, but Sri Lanka, we have not taken a single action on this. So this situation can be a threat to us if we don't manage it carefully. So we have to utilize our aging population in an effective manner. Also, we need to use the younger people also in a very productive manner. This is a debate that we need to have in terms of managing our population, the aging population. Right, these are the 5 trend factors that I wanted to discuss in the socio-cultural environment. Now I'm moving on to the third part of my story. Now, within these 5 factors, and in my first segment where I spoke about values, Sri Lankan cultural values, I derived 2 important strategic opportunities. First one is entrepreneurship and intrapreneurship. Second one is education. Now, if you are investing, if the government is allocating funds or if the government is investing funds, they have to look at these 2 areas in a serious way. Now, entrepreneurship, for us to have rural economic development, for us to have more women in the economic sphere, for us to have more export-oriented economy, for us to have good products, we need to engage in and invest in this entrepreneurship, and we need to create a culture, ecosystem for entrepreneurship. And also in terms of employment, we should not, with our entrepreneurs, we need to actually enhance them in terms of intrapreneurs. Right, George, I think that is pretty much it from me. Over to you.
Fine. Thank you so much, Saroshi. You brought on some very, very valuable points, and we really need to dig much deeper into them. But for sake of time, I just need to cross back to Rai now, bring Rai on board in terms of seeing what we can do, because we're kind of off time to some extent. But Rai, it's over to you.
Thanks, George. Thanks, Saroshi. So yeah, unfortunately, we are a little bit over time. That said, we do have all our viewers still with us. I think we've had 2 dropouts, but everybody else is still with us. Saroshi, if you'd like to just do a quick run through your last 2 slides where you're kind of detailing the opportunities. Do you want to take maybe 5 minutes and do that? Would that be enough for you?
Actually, it's 2 important factors, which is your intrapreneurship and entrepreneurship. And the other thing is education, because education, government, I don't think government can do this on their own. So a lot of investment, a lot of private sector interventions need to come in. And they need to really dig into these important area of education, and especially in terms of vocational education, in terms of technical education, in terms of business education. Those are like few areas that we want to bring in. So there will be huge opportunity for, I think, the private sector to come into education. And even in terms of, if you are not coming into education, then coming through CSR, coming through other interventions. So likewise, there will be a huge area of opportunities for all companies to come in terms of education. So these are from my socio-environmental, socio-cultural analysis. Entrepreneurship and entrepreneurship is one key strategic opportunity that I see, and also the other aspect is education. Yes, right. Thank you.
Thanks again, Saroshi, for giving us the explanation on that. So we have just a couple of questions. As I said, I'll run through the questions and amalgamate them so that it makes it easier for us. So I'm putting this to you, George. One of the questions that Giridhar Radhakrishna is asking is, sending skilled labor abroad for foreign exchange earnings is a disadvantage to Sri Lanka. We are already highly short of skilled labor. Most enterprises already suffer for a lack of adequate employable labor. Sri Lanka has major restrictions on import of labor as well. What are your thoughts on how we could possibly improve productivity and efficiency, and what opportunities this may sort of bring to the surface in the current environment? Thanks,
Rai. Thanks for that question. Very, very important point. I tend to have a different view there. Do we have a surplus of skilled labor? That's a good question to delve deep into. We have so many unemployed graduates. We have so many people who are seeking employment. Have we geared them? Have we driven them in the correct direction in terms of equipping them to take on tasks internationally? We may be having a question of taking on tasks nationally, but isn't this the time for us to look at how we can make Sri Lankans employable internationally? We have a massive surplus. I do not think it happens the other way around. When we look at, basic statistics, when we look at basic numbers, when you talk to people, when you begin to understand, you have so many who are extremely keen on looking for skilled, some form of skilled jobs. But we're not doing that within the context of Sri Lanka. We have underemployment on many occasions, and we have huge opportunities going forward. This is not something that we can do overnight. This is not a short-term strategy that has to be implemented. It certainly is long-term. We need to look at reforming the education sector and looking at university curricula, which is something that has been taken up. It's something that has been discussed at the very highest levels in recent weeks, making sure that our tertiary education sector is geared towards ensuring that our students respondents, our young people who are coming onto the job market, are equipped. And at that point, we are now coming to a scenario in which they are having a huge problem finding jobs. This will be a great opportunity for the future in terms for us to look at how we can, instead of sending unskilled labor, send skilled labor. Unskilled labor is not the solution for the future.
Thanks a lot, George, for explaining that. I think that makes a lot of sense, and it's something that one of those opportunities that we really need to start looking at. I think it combines well with what Saroshi said about the education side of it as well. So this one is for you, Ravi. Increasing taxes and custom duties may not bring in the additional cash needed to our debt-trapped country. The percentage of taxpayers are fairly small in that sense. Reduce taxes, reduce duties, and the aim should be to bring in FDIs in manufacturing and services. Sri Lanka has more RM than other resources than Dubai. What are our opportunities to make, for instance, Dubai's loss Sri Lanka's gain?
Quite a complex question. One thing is, of course, if you have the wrong sort of tax rates, you drive things into out of the tax net and into the black economy. So there have been tax reforms in places like Georgia, where they implemented things like a single low flat tax, and they found that the collection actually improved. So there are possibly opportunities like that, where if you lower the rates, you might be able to increase the compliance, reduce the smuggling, and collect more that way. So there may be opportunities in that, but it takes a certain amount of. It depends on how people respond. If the rates go down, whether there's a lock that is non-compliant that comes in, but there is certainly a subject worth studying there.
Thanks, Ravi. As I mentioned at the start of this session, this is the launch of a new series of webinars, which is based on the theme of Bounce Back Sri Lanka. So one of the opportunities that we will be looking deeply at, and we'll be talking a lot more and sharing resources with you on, is de-risking and deconcentration of the global supply chain. And I think that's one of the things that Ravi also touched on. He was talking about, maybe risk shifting out of China was one of the things that he mentioned. So, I mean, as we all know, when everything shut down so suddenly, a lot of manufacturing is based in China, and this caused a huge dearth on the global supply chain. And this is one opportunity that we see that Sri Lanka can really look at our businesses, our manufacturing and supply chains, kind of, looking at grabbing those opportunities. Maybe not, what's the word? Maybe when I say de-risking, not necessarily that all companies are moving out of China, but looking to diversify to other countries in the region. And this is an opportunity certainly that we can look at. I know that India has, there's been policy decisions there's been discussions of land parcels and offering land at concessionary, no tax and various things like that. And these are things that we too can certainly start looking at and delving deep into. And as part of this series, that's something that we really intend to do. On the same sort of way, we were talking about opportunities in the medical industry as well. And in that sense, Dr. Senathilaka, would you be able to share with us what you think? This is something that was actually thrown out at our last session in our last series by Professor Ranjit Bandara, where he mentioned, it connects beautifully with something Saroshi said as well about our culture and our traditional values. One of which is the care, the fact that Sri Lankans are extremely caring, the fact that our society is a value-based society rather than a rights-based society. And therefore, we take more care of our elders, we take more responsibility in the home, we're not, we take more responsibility or more care of our children as well. At age 18, they're not shoved out and said, go get yourself a job and live. They still live at home with us. So as part of this, one of the suggestions that Professor Bandara brought out was elder care tourism or tourism based on elder care, retirement as Sri Lanka as a retirement destination, where packages can be sold for 6 months at a time or 2 years, or whatever, at minimum maybe 3 to 6 months. What are your thoughts on that, and what sort of strain it would put on the medical system? Because we're talking about elders with various, you have the blood pressure issues, you have the cardiac issues. Do we have the capability to cope with an opportunity like that? Is that something that our private sector could be looking at, an opportunity for both the medical fraternity as well as for the tourism industry?
That's a very important point that you touch on. Basically, this area of medicine, taking care of the medical needs of the old age group people is called geriatrics. And geriatrics is something that still in its infancy in Sri Lanka, as far as Sri Lanka is concerned. So we have a handful number of, geriatricians in the country. Some are already serving in some of the private hospitals. I can't give you a general opinion about where others are working, but certainly the requirements of a person who has reached a certain age, which will fall into geriatric age, are actually being neglected to a great extent till recently, because this subspecialty called geriatrics was not considered as not grown to that extent in our country in the recent past. Now that people are coming with specialist training in geriatrics, some of the places have these qualified geriatrics, physicians. So till then, it was the general physician who actually looked after a lot of problems related to old age. But then again, the other consultants also played a part, in the sense that if you have, as you mentioned, if it's a cardiac issue, of course, irrespective of the age, you tend to go to your same cardiologist or to a physician. If you have a joint issue, mobility issue, you will probably go to your rheumatologist. Likewise, people found their own ways of, tackling the problem. But from a holistic point of view, as a geriatrician, probably we may not have done justice to that patient. But since it is growing now, I suppose when people get to know that geriatricians are available in the hospitals who have a specialized training in matters related to old age, as far as their health is concerned, probably we have room to improve and get these people to come and meet our geriatricians for valuable scientific and evidence-based medicine for the rest of their lives.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Senathilaka. That's an interesting view, geriatric medicine and what we can do around that. So one of the things that is going to be resultant from today's session is that as part of our AmCham members and our AmCham viewers, our bulletin board viewers will know that something that we do is a topic in focus publication. And what we will do is take from the 4 presentations we had today, we will compile for you a document, a sort of playbook, as it were, and that will be shared with you probably by Monday. It will be on our bulletin board as well as we'll share it with each of the viewers here. And that's something that, so as we sort of collaborate and concise it, it will give you points that you can actually refer to on what the opportunities that our experts today have identified and how you can best make them work for your individual industries. So thank you to each of our panelists once more. Your insights invaluable as always. Thank you to each of our viewers here on Zoom as well as on Facebook Live. And of course, not forgetting our partners, Fairfirst Insurance, who, by the way, are offering our participants today a special discount on their motor insurance. You merely have to use the code AmCham10 on their website. That's AmCham10 on their website, www.fairfirst.lk. And of course, not forgetting the Daily FT. Next week, we'll be speaking about agility and repurposing, looking at some examples of businesses that have successfully pivoted in the last 4 months, and of course, discussing the nitty-gritties of what needs to be done to harness some of the opportunities we identified today. So of course that will be taken on, we'll take that on from the document that we're going to share as well. And then we'll look at a more in-depth view of how to capitalize on those opportunities next week. So don't miss out on that session. Next Thursday, as always, details of course via the AmCham SL Bulletin Board and our social media platforms, and of course the Daily FT. Now don't forget the session goes up on our AmCham YouTube channel, AmCham Sri Lanka shortly. You can always refer back. We had several messages and several emails asking if we'll be sharing the presentations. So you just need to watch the video and you can stop and play back and take screenshots and whatever you need to. So all of it will be available up there on our YouTube channel shortly. And of course, if you happen to miss any of our previous sessions, you can catch up on those too. Please do watch, like, share, and of course, give us some love by subscribing to our YouTube channel. As you know, it helps finance these resources. So your subscribing to our channel will help us to continue to bring you these resources free of charge. Again, thank you to every single one of you. We've been, I think, 2 hours and 10 minutes now. So that's way over our usual time. And you're all still here with us. That shows how valuable you find our support and our resources to you. And we thank you for giving us that confidence and that position in your businesses and your business continuity. As always, our friendly reminder from the AmCham team, stay safe, stay healthy, and I go until next week.